"Do you know what your best Christmas gift would be, Mom?" Ethan, my son, shouted across the dinner table in front of neighbors, relatives, and my 2 grandchildren who sat trembling. "It would be you disappearing from this house forever." My hands shook, the tray slipped, and the plates shattered across the wooden floor. Before I could react, Ethan leaned close to my ear and whispered, "Leave, Mom, before tomorrow becomes too late." But that night, when I pretended to sleep, the bedroom door opened gently, and Ethan's voice rose in the dark. "I'm sorry, Mom, but this is the only way." I realized I was about to lose something no one expected. Not my home, but my life. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like, so it can reach even further. I didn't know how long I had been sitting on the icy wooden kitchen floor. From behind me, the awkward conversations of guests pretending nothing had happened still echoed. The Christmas lights along the window cast the same twinkling glow I'd loved for years. But tonight, they only made my chest tighten, as if every last comfort was slipping away. I, Margaret Doyle, 70 years old, never imagined I would live to see the day my own son cast me out on the most sacred holiday of American families. Christmas used to be the sound of children's laughter, the scent of cinnamon in baked treats, the image of my husband, Robert, carving the turkey while I set the table. Yet here I was, alone on a cold tile floor, feeling as if the entire world I had built over 40 years had just collapsed. When I looked up, I saw Lindsay, my daughter-in-law, standing by the door with her arms crossed. Her eyes held not a single trace of sympathy, only annoyance mixed with impatience, as if I were a burden she had been forced to tolerate. "Are you all right?" she asked in a flat voice, clearly for the sake of the guests who hadn't yet left. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mouth felt as dry as paper. Every word stuck in my throat. She glanced toward the living room, then lowered her voice just enough for only me to hear. "Don't make things worse. Don't worry the kids." I knew she meant my 2 grandchildren, Aiden and Mia. They had been sitting pressed together, faces pale, hands clenched tight. When they tried to run to me, Lindsay only had to give them one sharp look for them to freeze. "Don't ask anything," she said, as if everything happening tonight were normal. My heart hurt so deeply I had to hold my chest. As I slowly stood up, the neighbors awkwardly excused themselves. I forced a weak smile at each of them, even though all I wanted was to run out of the house. But this was my home, the house in Santa Fe I bought with a lifetime of savings after Robert passed. The place I chose for my peaceful old age, the place I believed my son would protect, not turn into a stage for humiliation like tonight. After everyone left, Ethan stayed seated, eyes bloodshot from anger or something else. I couldn't tell. He let out a long breath, then walked to his bedroom, leaving behind a hollow silence. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay still, eyes fixed on the dark wall. Every small sound downstairs made my heart jump. I didn't know what Ethan meant by, "Tomorrow will be too late," but I knew it wasn't just a remark thrown out in anger. Something deeper was hidden beneath it, something frightening. Around 3 a.m., I heard footsteps, soft, cautious. I shut my eyes quickly, pretending to be asleep. The bedroom door opened halfway. Light from the hallway spilled in, forming a faint line across the floor. I heard Ethan's familiar breathing. He stood there for a long moment, then whispered, "I'm sorry, Mom, but this is the only..." The door closed. I lay motionless as tears soaked my pillow. I knew the danger had come far too close. The next morning, the New Mexico sun cast its usual warm, golden light into the kitchen, but everything had changed. Ethan and Lindsay acted as if the previous night had never happened. They sat at the kitchen table drinking coffee, discussing Christmas gifts for the kids. Their gentle tones were terrifying in their own way. I felt like I was living in a movie where someone tried to hide guilt behind overly normal behavior. "Good morning, Mom," Ethan said, as if he had never screamed that he wanted me gone from his life. I tried to stay calm while pouring coffee, but when I set the pot down, I noticed a strange envelope on the table, placed right next to Ethan's coffee cup. On it were the bold letters, paperwork for signature only. A chill moved through me. This wasn't just a feeling anymore. Something was happening. When I reached toward it to read more clearly, Ethan instantly covered it with his hand. So quickly, it startled me. "This has nothing to do with you," he said, his voice unnaturally sharp. Lindsay gave a small cough, as if signaling him to stop talking. I watched every movement they made. Everything was too clear. They were hiding something important from me, something about the house, or something worse. I set my cup down and left the kitchen, but just as I stepped into the hallway, I heard Lindsay whisper, "You need to do it before she gets suspicious." Ethan replied quietly, "I know, there's no other way." A cold shiver traveled down my spine. I returned to my bedroom, shut the door, and locked it, hands trembling so badly I could barely hold my phone. The house I'd trusted had become a place where I had to fear every breath. I looked at the framed photo of Robert and me and wondered if things would have spiraled this far if he were still alive. I had to find out the truth. I had to save myself before it was too late. Ethan's words, "There's no other way," echoed like a death knell in my head. I sat on the edge of the bed, inhaled deeply, and told myself, "Margaret, you cannot let them do anything behind your back. Not again." I decided from this moment on, I would observe everything, every word, every action, every document. I needed to know what they were planning, and I needed to be one step ahead. Christmas this year was no longer Christmas. It was the beginning of a battle I never wanted, but had no choice but to fight, to protect my home, my life, and my safety. I went back to my bedroom and closed the door softly, as if even the smallest sound could shatter the fragile calm inside me. The morning light slipped through the curtains, spreading a familiar golden stripe across the carpet. This house, the home I paid for with every hard-earned dollar, was still beautiful and warm as ever, but the sense of safety was gone. Every corner, every footstep, every whispered conversation held the shape of a hidden threat. I pressed my hand to my chest, willing my breath to steady. "Stay calm, Margaret," I told myself. "Don't let them see you're afraid." I couldn't act impulsively. One wrong step might place me exactly where they wanted me. I needed to observe, take note, and wait for the right moment. They were preparing something. I had to know what it was. Around 8 a.m., I walked downstairs quietly. I didn't want to join Ethan and Lindsay for breakfast, but I also couldn't let them think I was avoiding them. I needed to keep everything appearing normal until I knew their plan. As I neared the living room, I heard faint voices from the kitchen. I stopped behind the wall, heart pounding. "Have you talked to him yet?" Lindsay's voice, low and urgent. "Tonight," Ethan answered, "before she starts suspecting." I forced myself to stay still. Who were they calling him? A lawyer? A doctor? Someone who could sign documents for them? I heard Lindsay sigh. "I don't want any more delays. You know the situation. We can't let this drag on." "I know," Ethan said, voice tight and low, "but rushing will make it fall apart. She has to think everything is normal." I covered my mouth to stop a gasp. So it was true. Last night wasn't an angry outburst. Ethan was planning something calculated, something that required me to not suspect anything. I took a few steps back, feeling the floor tilt beneath me. I didn't dare listen further, afraid they'd catch me. But every word I'd heard was enough to make my mind spiral. I walked straight to the backyard for air. December in Santa Fe was cold but sunny. The dry desert wind brushed against the wooden fence, carrying the scent of pine from the Christmas tree we'd decorated just yesterday. The sky was so blue and peaceful, it felt cruel compared to what was happening inside the house. I sat on the old wooden chair Robert had built. I closed my eyes, trying to hold on to a memory warm enough to steady me. But instead of comfort, I felt emptiness. When Robert was alive, Ethan never dared raise his voice at me. Now, he not only raised it, but used words, sharp enough to carve open my heart. A door creaked. I opened my eyes to see Lindsay walking out with a trash bag in her hand. She looked at me for a moment, then said with polite falseness, "Would you like to come inside for lunch? The kids are waiting." I offered a faint smile. "I'll sit here a little longer." She nodded, but her guarded expression didn't fade. She was afraid I had heard something, and that fear only confirmed how far they had already gone. About an hour later, I went inside to make more coffee. Ethan and Lindsay had taken the kids to basketball basketball practice. Their absence made the kitchen feel slightly safer. I stood at the counter, forcing my hand not to shake as I lifted the glass pot. I had to look around carefully before letting out a shaky breath. I felt like an intruder in my own home, the house I'd paid for, repaired, cleaned, loved. When I set the mug down, something caught my eye near the kitchen table, a folded scrap of paper. I bent down to pick it up. It was just a torn corner, but enough to read the heading, Competency Evaluation, Patient Information. Name of patient, Margaret Doyle. My face flushed hot, then drained of color in the same heartbeat. I had to grip the counter not to fall. They were planning to have me declared incompetent, cognitively impaired, unable to manage my own finances. Were they trying to turn me into someone with no legal autonomy? One sentence could destroy everything I had. The court finds that she lacks decision-making capacity. If they succeeded, I would lose everything. My home, my bank accounts, my right to decide where I lived. I could be placed in a facility of their choosing. I would have no voice in my own life. Hands shaking, I crumpled the paper and hid it deep in my sweater pocket. I needed to stay quiet. I couldn't let them know I'd seen it. Near noon, Lindsay and the kids returned. Aiden ran to hug me, but seconds later, Lindsay called, "Aiden, Mia, go change and get ready for lunch." They let go of me instantly, confusion in their eyes. They were so sensitive. I knew they had sensed something wrong since last night, but Lindsay wanted everything controlled. She wanted them silent. At lunch, I tried to smile at the kids, but the heavy air made everything feel hollow. "You're not eating, Mom?" Ethan asked, sounding artificially casual. "I'm not hungry," I said. Aiden looked up, quietly asking, "Are you sad, Grandma?" Lindsay cut in immediately. "Don't ask grown-up questions." I looked into his eyes and saw fear. He had heard something, either last night or many nights before. Children know more than adults think. I steadied my hand on the back of my chair. I couldn't react emotionally. I was living inside a house full of secrets, and I had to see through every shadow. That afternoon, Ethan and Lindsay left to buy more Christmas decorations, leaving me with the kids. As soon as the door closed, Mia edged closer and whispered, "Grandma, Mom and Dad said you're going away soon. Is that true?" My chest clenched. I knelt down and pulled them close. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "No one gets to force me to go anywhere." Aiden watched me carefully, the weight of a 12-year-old who had carried too much. Then he whispered, "I heard Dad say, we have to do it soon, or it'll be too late. I don't know what it means." But he sounded scared. I stroked his hair. "Thank you for telling me." In that moment, I realized something painful. The children were being caught in the ripples of a deception they could not understand. And I, the grandmother they trusted, would have to protect them, even if I didn't yet know how. That evening, I didn't come down for dinner. I said I was tired and wanted to rest, but really I needed time to think. I sat by the bedroom window, watching Christmas lights flicker across the porch. The whole neighborhood of Cedar Crest Road glowed with holiday warmth, but inside my room, every breath felt urgent. I thought of the envelope labeled "for signature only." I thought of the competency evaluation form. I thought of Ethan's whispered words outside my bedroom the night before. Everything came together into a single picture, a deliberate plan with help behind it and with time to prepare. And I, someone who once believed that loving and sacrificing were enough, now had to learn how to protect myself from my own flesh and blood. I stood up, locked my bedroom door, and whispered into the darkness, "Enough, Margaret. You have to find the truth. You cannot let them first." That was the moment I knew I was no longer the mother who simply endured. I would observe, listen, remember every sign, and when the time came, I would act. My battle started on this very Christmas night. The next morning, I was cleaning dishes in the sink when I heard a car stop outside. Through the small window beside the kitchen, I saw Ethan step out with a young man in a light gray suit. The Santa Fe sunlight reflected off his polished shoes, and his gait leaned forward as if trying to appear friendly, though it didn't come naturally. I froze, the unease from the night before rushing back. Ethan opened the door first, then turned and gestured for the young man to follow him inside. "Come in, Mark. This is my mother." I wiped my hands quickly on a towel and straightened up. The man approached and held out his hand. "Good morning, Mrs. Doyle. I'm Mark Preston, the family attorney. I'm here to assist with a few matters regarding the protection of your assets." I didn't shake his hand. I simply looked straight into his eyes too polished for me to trust. "Family attorney?" I repeated. "Since when?" Ethan stepped closer and placed a hand on my shoulder, as if trying to reassure me, but the slight pressure made me shiver. "I hired him to help you with paperwork, you know." "That," Ethan said, his voice gentle but unnatural. "You've been forgetful lately. I just want to make sure everything is handled properly." I stepped away from his hand. "What are you talking about? I never agreed to let anyone review my documents." Mark gave a courteous smile, the kind perfected by practicing in front of a mirror. "Don't worry, Mrs. Doyle. I only want to ensure your finances are arranged optimally. Many older individuals recently have been vulnerable to mistakes in managing assets. We simply want to protect you from unnecessary errors." His tone was soft but hollow, every word carefully selected to sound kind but devoid of sincerity. I crossed my arms. "I don't need help." Ethan jumped in immediately. "But you do, Mom. You're not young anymore. I'm just trying to support you." The words lodged in my throat. I remembered every payment, every bill, every insurance document. I had handled all of it myself without a single mistake. Yet now my son stood before me, telling a stranger that I was no longer capable. My hands tightened to stop them from trembling. "Mark," Ethan continued, "why don't you show Mom those documents?" Mark opened his leather briefcase and took out a thick stack of paperwork. He flipped a few pages, then handed me a clipped set, speaking in the same even tone. "These are just a few basic forms. We prepared them in advance to save time." I looked down. The first line struck me like a blow. "Petition for determination of incapacity." I felt my breath catch. I flipped to another page, another title, "Transfer of Property, Executor Authorization." I stepped back several feet. On the third page, something made my entire body go cold. My signature. But the handwriting was sloppy, uneven, nothing like the signature I had used for decades. "This," I whispered. "I never signed this." Mark frowned, unable to hide the flicker of tension in his eyes. Ethan took a step forward, raising his voice. "You signed it, but forgot. I told you, you've been forgetful." I opened my mouth to respond, but then heard a knock at the door. Before anyone could react, the door opened and a middle-aged man in a fedora stepped inside. It was Patrick Harris, my attorney of 20 years. He glanced around the room once and his steel-cold gaze locked onto Mark. "Good morning, Mrs. Doyle," Patrick said in his familiar, calm tone. "I saw an unfamiliar car outside and thought I'd stop in to make sure everything was all right." Ethan's expression changed instantly. Lindsay came down the stairs, unable to hide her panic. Mark tried to recover his composure. "I'm the family attorney," Mark began. "I'm assisting Mrs. Doyle with—" "Which family?" Patrick cut in, his tone soft but razor sharp. "I wasn't notified of any change in Mrs. Doyle's legal representation." Patrick's presence made me feel as though I was no longer standing, alone in that room. He walked to my side and glanced at the papers in my hand. His brows lifted slightly. "And what do we have here, Mrs. Doyle?" Ethan jumped in. "It's just some forms Mom needs to sign so I can help manage her assets." Patrick raised a hand, signaling him to stop. He gently took the documents from me and examined each page slowly. The more he read, the darker his expression became. When he reached the forged signature, he turned to Mark. "How do you explain this signature? When did Mrs. Doyle sign it? Where? And with which witness present?" Mark swallowed hard, his face draining of color. "I only handled the final part. Ethan provided the paperwork." Patrick tapped the stack sharply against the table. "I'll ask again. On what basis were these documents prepared?" No one answered. Patrick flipped to the competency certification included with the file Ethan planned to submit. He looked at the doctor's name at the bottom, then let out a cold laugh. "Dr. Elliot Raymond?" he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "He passed away 18 months ago." Silence crashed over the room. Lindsay turned pale. Ethan stood frozen as if struck. Mark, the so-called family attorney, completely unraveled. I didn't know. Patrick Patrick folded his arms, his voice like ice. "You are standing in the home of a woman whose property you and your client attempted to seize using falsified documents. Would you prefer I call the police now, or do you want to leave before they arrive?" Mark's face collapsed. He shut his briefcase, bowed his head toward me, and hurried out the door like a man fleeing danger. The silence that followed made the house feel cavernous. Ethan slammed his hand against the kitchen table. "You don't understand anything. You're ruining everything. I was trying to help you. Stripping me of my rights is helping me," I asked, my voice shaking but firm. He planted his hands on his hips and shouted, "If you keep acting like this, you'll lose everything. You'll have to leave the house and it'll be your fault." I stood tall and looked at my son, the child I once held and comforted, now a man I could no longer recognize. "Ethan," I said softly but clearly, "I haven't forgotten anything. I remember exactly who is trying to push me out of my own home." He said nothing more. He glared at me with burning resentment, then stormed upstairs, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. Patrick turned to me, his voice gentler again. "You need to be careful from now on. I'll handle the paperwork and file an alert with the county office, but you should not be alone with Ethan when tensions are this high. I want you to lock your door tonight." I nodded. For the first time in my life, I realized I had to protect myself from my own son. That night, I locked my door twice. I even placed a chair against the doorknob. Not because I believed Ethan would do something terrible, but because I no longer believed anything was impossible. The Santa Fe moon poured silver light across the wooden floor. I sat there, arms wrapped around myself, thinking about everything that had happened. The forged signature, the deceased doctor, the inexperienced attorney hired to legitimize it all, and my son standing in the kitchen, speaking to me as if I were a burden to be removed. When the house finally fell silent, I heard Ethan's footsteps move down the hallway. He stopped right outside my door, didn't knock, didn't speak, just stood there. I held my breath, gripping the edge of the chair. Then the footsteps resumed, fading away. I knew clearly nothing was over. This was only the surface of something deeper and far more dangerous. I closed my eyes and told myself, "From now on, you must be stronger than ever, Margaret. You cannot break." I woke earlier than usual. I had barely slept. Every gust of wind against the roof tiles, every faint click in the hallway sent a jolt through me. In the house that once felt like my final refuge, all I felt now was a creeping unease. I stepped out of bed, willing my legs not to shake. The early Santa Fe light slipped through the curtains, casting faint golden stripes across the wooden floor. I inhaled deeply, reminding myself to stay alert, to look carefully, to listen to every detail, no matter how small. The first thing I wanted to check was the bedside drawer, where I kept a small blue notebook I had carried for years. It held Patrick's phone number, bank information, password hints, and notes about my assets. I kept it there because no one had any reason to touch my personal things. But this morning, when I opened the drawer, I froze. The notebook was gone. I tore through the drawer. Nothing. I opened the second drawer. Nothing. I checked my purse, the living room, even the kitchen cabinets. Still nothing. The one notebook I had never misplaced had vanished. A chill ran down my spine. No one knew the value of that notebook, except those who understood what was inside. And in this house, only 3 people had access to it. Me, Ethan, and Lindsay. I stood in the middle of my bedroom, closed my eyes. A memory flashed unexpectedly. About 2 months ago, I slipped in the bathroom. I had only bumped the wall lightly, but it left me dizzy. I remembered Lindsay rushing in, insisting I rest, and she volunteered to tidy my room. I thought it was kindness. But now, I suddenly remembered lying on the bed for more than half an hour, eyes closed from the headache, while Lindsay moved around the room, opening drawers, rearranging blankets, then leaving with something in her hand. Heat rose through my chest. If she had been searching for something, that moment had been perfect. I I sank onto the bed, gripping the blanket to steady the vertigo. They had prepared, not for days, for months. To be sure, I called Patrick. He answered almost immediately, his tone alert and serious. "Mrs. Doyle, are you all right?" "No," I said honestly. "My notebook is gone." Patrick fell silent for a beat, then spoke quickly, almost like a command. "You need to check your bank accounts right now, and I'll look up your property records in the Santa Fe County system. I have a bad feeling." I heard fast typing on his end. After a few minutes, Patrick exhaled sharply. "I found it. A request to transfer ownership of your home has been filed under Ethan Doyle's name." I blurted out, "Oh, dear God," Patrick continued. "The file includes a form with your signature, but," he paused, "the handwriting is close, but it's missing the curved stroke you always use in your M. I know your signature well." My throat tightened. There was no doubt now. Everything had been happening behind my back for a long time. "Patrick," I said, trying not to let my voice shake, "they prepared long before I realized anything." "Yes," he replied, "and they waited for the right moment to make you think you were slipping. If I hadn't arrived yesterday," he didn't finish the sentence, but I knew exactly how it would have ended. I thanked him and hung up. A heavy silence filled the room. I placed my hand against the wall to steady myself. I refused to cry. Tears right now would only weaken me. I wasn't allowed to be weak anymore. When I entered the kitchen, I saw Lindsay standing there, fidgeting with a dish towel. Her eyes flicked toward me in alarm before she quickly looked away, as if afraid I had discovered something. That startled look told me she knew I was suspicious, and she was scared. Not scared of me, scared that their plan was cracking. Lindsay forced a smile. "Would you like some coffee?" "No," I said softly but firmly. I saw her shoulders tense. Lindsay was usually controlled, composed. But this morning she couldn't hide her nervousness. Maybe Ethan had told her what happened yesterday. Maybe they had rehearsed their next steps. But clearly the disruption had shaken them. I sat at the dining table and stared at her without speaking. Within seconds, Lindsay fled the kitchen, her steps too quick to be casual. I began gathering every important document in the house. The deed, savings accounts, insurance, investment papers, the purchase contract for the house, even small slips of paper with password hints. I placed everything into a small suitcase I had never used. I knew I had to store them somewhere else. They could not remain under this roof. When I slid open another drawer, I noticed something else missing. The folder containing the copy of my home purchase contract. It was gone too. The one item they needed to complete their scheme, no longer in its place. There was no longer any doubt. Piece by piece, day by day, they had prepared the path to take everything, and I, foolishly, had not seen it. I gripped the edge of the cabinet, trying not to let a sob escape. In the afternoon, my 2 grandchildren returned from school. Normally, they would run up to me, hugging me tightly and telling me all about their teacher, their friends, their new games. But today, they only stood at the doorway looking at me with cautious eyes. Aiden lowered his head. Mia held her brother's hand, squeezing it tightly as if searching for safety. I opened my mouth to call them over, but Lindsay appeared behind them immediately and said quickly, "You two go do your homework. Your grandmother is tired and a little confused." I looked straight into her face. "What did you just say?" Lindsay shrugged, her voice steady. "They need to know you're going through a difficult time, so they can be prepared." Aiden looked at me, then at his mother, then back at me. His eyes were full of turmoil, as if he didn't know whom to believe. The sight pierced my heart. I wanted to go hug them, but I knew Lindsay would use it to reinforce her story that I was unstable. The 2 of them quietly went upstairs, their footsteps heavy. I remained standing in the kitchen, feeling as if I had just lost something else. The closeness of the 2 grandchildren I loved more than life itself. That night, after the children were asleep, I checked the suitcase I had prepared once more. I placed all the documents inside, locked it, and slid it beneath the bed. I knew even that wasn't truly safe, but it was better than leaving everything out in the open. As I sat on the edge of the bed, I realized something I had been avoiding for a long time. I was completely alone. No one in this house was on my side. No one wanted to protect me, and the people people I loved most were becoming the greatest threat to me. But surprisingly, instead of collapsing, I felt a quiet determination spread through me, a strength I believed only those who had lived through a lifetime of loss could possess. I whispered, as if speaking to the woman in the mirror. No one is allowed to take my life away from me. No one is allowed to force me out of my own existence. Not again. I lifted my gaze, watching the moonlight cast onto the wall. It wasn't the light of hope. It was a reminder that I still had time to fight, time to hold on to what belonged to me, even if I had to stand alone in this battle. And that night, for the first time in weeks, I didn't tremble with fear. I trembled with anger, with the realization of a brutal truth. They had been watching me for a long time, but they had forgotten one thing. I was not easy to break. I was sitting in the living room when the phone rang. A strange number appeared on the screen, a Santa Fe area code. A bad feeling ran down my spine. I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. Is this Mrs. Margaret Doyle? Yes, I'm speaking. On the other end was the voice of a middle-aged woman, firm but polite. I'm calling from the Owatizai Santa Fe County Recorder's Office. The paperwork to transfer ownership of the property at Cedar Crest Road is currently being processed. We need you to be present to confirm it before 2 p.m. today. I shot to my feet as if the ground had been yanked out from under me. I didn't file any transfer paperwork, I said, each word breaking out of my throat. The woman sounded surprised. Then you'll need to come in immediately to stop the file before we finalize it. After 2 p.m., the process will be very difficult to reverse. I had to grab the back of the chair because my whole body wavered. They had really gone that far. I thanked her and hung up, but my hands were still shaking uncontrollably. I called Patrick right away. He told me to stay calm, that he was preparing to submit an objection to the county, but I still had to appear in person to confirm, and I must not go alone. I set the phone down on the table. There was only one person left whom I could trust. Emily, my only daughter, the child who had left Santa Fe for Denver to build a career, always physically distant, but never emotionally far from me. I dialed her number. When Emily picked up and heard my voice, she immediately asked, "Mom, are you crying? What happened?" I choked up. After a lifetime of being a mother, in that moment I felt smaller than ever. Emily, Ethan and Lindsay are trying to take the house. They forged documents. They already filed the transfer. Silence on the line. Just a few seconds. Then Emily burst out, furious. What did they do? I heard her breathing hard, the quick footsteps in her kitchen. She was likely rushing to find her husband. "Mom, you cannot stay there another minute," Emily said, almost commanding. "I'm sending Ben to pick you up. He's leaving right now. Gather all your documents and evidence. Do not sign anything. Do not say anything else to them." I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I didn't feel completely alone. "Thank you, Emily. You're my family," she said, voice tight. "I won't let anyone hurt you." After the call, I ran upstairs, opened the closet, and pulled out my suitcase. I gathered everything important: the house deed, the copy of the purchase contract, the savings book, utility bills proving I was the homeowner, email exchanges with the bank, and the forged competency evaluation. I placed everything into a separate stack. I took a few personal treasures as well. The silver bracelet Robert had given me the year we married, the small family photo album from the years we were still whole, and the letter Robert wrote when he first fell seriously ill. A letter I kept in a hidden drawer no one knew about. Each item I picked up felt like a fresh cut across my heart. I had never imagined there would come a day when I had to leave my own home like someone escaping a crime scene. I set the suitcase on the floor, locked it, then sat beside it. Morning. Light filtered through the window, shining onto the suitcase as if it were evidence being carried to court. I took a breath. A long day awaited me. The next morning, I woke even earlier than usual. I brewed a pot of coffee but didn't drink it. My stomach was knotted tight. I just wanted to get this over with. Around 8 a.m., Ethan came downstairs first. When he saw me with the suitcase by the door, he stopped short. "What are you doing?" he asked, but the panic in his voice outweighed any concern. "I'm leaving," I answered, short and clear. Ethan hurried toward me, trying to maintain calm, though his hands twitched slightly. "Mom, you're misunderstanding everything. Yesterday was just a mix-up. I was only trying to help you. You can't just leave like this." "I'm not misunderstanding anything," I said, keeping my eyes on him. "I know what you did. I know about the paperwork you submitted to the county." Ethan's face drained of color. He glanced toward the stairs, where Lindsay had appeared. She stood there with her arms crossed, looking pale. Clearly she knew their plan had completely fallen apart. Ethan turned back to me, dropping the pretense for the first time. "You can't leave this house. You're still my responsibility." I looked directly into the eyes of my son, eyes that once shone with joy on his college graduation day, when he first held his newborn child, when he hugged me after Robert's funeral. But now, those eyes held only the desperation of someone terrified of losing what they had tried to steal. I spoke softly, but every word was a blade. "This house is mine, not yours." Ethan shook his head, as if unable to accept the truth. "Lindsay was just helping with the paperwork, Mom. Don't think she—" I cut him off. "She wants to control everything, and you let her." Lindsay stepped down a few steps, her voice shaking. "You're misunderstanding us. Ethan just wants to make sure everything you have is safe." I turned to her and asked a single question. "Safe for me or for the two of you?" She fell silent, and that silence confirmed everything. I placed an envelope on the kitchen table. Ethan saw it immediately. "What's that?" "I left a few words," I said, "for clarity. I didn't want them reading it while I was still in the house, so I lifted the suitcase and walked to the door. But before stepping out, I turned back and said, 'I've reported you, and I won't return until the truth is brought to light.'" Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Lindsay nearly collapsed into a chair. All the color drained from her face. I stepped outside and closed the door with enough force to make a statement, not from anger, but from pain. Pain because I knew I wasn't only leaving a house, I was leaving a piece of my life. I stood at the bottom of the steps, rolling my suitcase toward the sidewalk. The Santa Fe morning was crisp. Sunlight stretched across the quiet street, reminding me of all the mornings I'd walked here, greeting neighbors, smiling at children riding their bikes. Everything looked the same today, only I was different. A soft car horn sounded. Ben, my son-in-law, lowered the window. His eyes were worried but determined. "I'm here to get you," he said. I nodded, offering a weak but genuine smile. He got out, took my suitcase, and opened the car door. As I sat down and looked back at the house one last time, my eyes stung. Not from fear, not from regret, but because I had never imagined there would come a day when I'd leave, and leave behind a son I had loved with everything in me. Ben started the engine. The car pulled away. The house grew smaller in the rearview mirror, and Santa Fe, the place I had lived for nearly 30 years, receded farther and farther. I left in silence, in the sorrow of a mother, but also with the resolve of a woman who knew this was the first step toward reclaiming her life. Ben drove for hours along the route from Santa Fe to Denver. I watched the scenery slip past the window. Low mountains, red earth roads, the small towns I'd passed so many times taking the kids to summer festivals. With every mile, I felt myself pulling away from my old life, but my heart grew heavier. When we reached Denver, Emily rushed out the moment the door opened, wrapping her arms around me. She hugged me so tightly as if afraid that if she let go, I would disappear again. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't know things were this bad," Emily said, her voice breaking. I patted her back gently, but I didn't cry. My tears had long dried up. Only an empty ache remained, something no amount of sobbing could ease. Emily took me to the guest room. Clean linens, a faint lavender scent, everything warm, kind, thoughtful, yet it all felt distant. I sat on the bed staring at my hands, the hands that once held Ethan, raised my children, cared for my husband, carried decades of family life. Now they trembled lightly as if carrying the weight of an entire lifetime of disappointment. "Just rest tonight," Emily said. "Let me handle the rest." I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. The next morning, I went downstairs where Emily was preparing breakfast. The smell of fresh coffee filled the kitchen, and soft jazz played from the speakers. Ben was fixing a stuck cabinet door, and Noah, my grandson, sat at the table drawing a robot with crayons. He looked up when he saw me. "Grandma, you're really staying with us?" I nodded, at least for a while. Noah hesitated, then asked quietly, I heard Mom on the phone last night. Did Uncle Ethan do something that made you sad? I didn't want to drag him into adult problems, but Noah was 14, old enough to understand disappointment. "Yes, sweetheart," I said softly. "Your Uncle Ethan has lost his way." Noah pressed his lips together. After a moment, he asked, "Grandma, does Uncle Ethan owe money?" I froze. "Why do you ask that?" Noah lowered his head, twisting his crayon. "A few months ago, Uncle Ethan called my parents, said he needed money urgently to start a business. They gave him $3,000, but he never paid it back." Emily turned from the stove when she heard him, pain flickering across her face. "I didn't want to upset you," she said, "but maybe you need to know." I leaned back in my chair. My shoulders felt impossibly heavy. Ethan, borrowing money from his own sister and not paying it back. My Ethan, the boy who once smashed open his piggy bank to buy me a birthday gift when he was 8 years old, now doing this? My heart tightened. Not because of the money, because of the change in him, the person he had become. Around noon, Patrick called. He got straight to the point. "Mrs. Doyle, I have news. Those two, Ethan and his wife, have been detained for questioning." I gripped the phone. "Because of the forged documents?" "For more than that," Patrick said. "The police discovered Ethan owes nearly $45,000 to a loan sharking group in Albuquerque. The interest is extremely high. They visited your house twice looking for him but didn't find him. They believe Ethan was preparing to sell your property to pay the debt." I sat on the edge of the chair. The Denver floor beneath my feet felt like it was shifting. "Ethan owes that much?" "Yes, and Lindsay admitted during questioning that Ethan wanted to use your house to pay off the debt before those people came after him." My hands trembled. For the first time in days, I couldn't stop it. Patrick continued, "And one more thing you need to know. According to the report from the jewelry store, Ethan sold several pieces of your jewelry over the past 3 months, the ones Mr. Robert gave you." I closed my eyes. A sharp pain stabbed through my chest. Those pieces of jewelry weren't valuable in terms of money, but they were memories. The days when Robert and I were still young, still deeply in love, still making promises with our fingers intertwined. Each item was a fragment of the past, a piece of the husband who was no longer here. Yet Ethan sold them without asking me a single word. I couldn't speak anymore. I just went still, as if all the strength had been drained from my body. Patrick lowered his voice gently. "I know this is very hard to accept, but leaving the house was the right decision. Now you need to provide them with every piece of evidence you have. The sooner the better." I answered softly, "I understand." That afternoon, I sat alone in Emily's living room. The Denver sunlight streamed across the carpet, forming a warm stripe of light. But nothing inside me felt warm. I picked up the photo album, the one I had taken from Santa Fe. I opened it page by page. A photo of Ethan as a child. Blonde hair, chubby cheeks, always clinging to my leg. A photo of his 10th birthday. Blowing candles, looking at me with eyes that sparkled like stars. A photo from his high school graduation, standing in the courtyard proudly linking his arm with mine. Who was the person in those photographs? Did that boy still exist? Or had something taken him away long ago? I set the album down. A tear fell onto the page, the first drop after days of being dried out. I wondered, which moment did I miss? What didn't I see as he grew up? Was there still a way to save him? But deep in my mind, I knew the answer. There are children you can guide back onto the right path. And there are children who, no matter how far you reach out, still choose to walk into the darkness. And I, a mother who spent her whole life giving, finally had to understand. You cannot save someone who doesn't want to be saved. That night, I followed Patrick's instructions. I opened my laptop and changed every banking password. Savings, credit cards, retirement accounts, investment management. I canceled every secondary card Ethan once had, locked all automatic transactions, and activated two-factor authentication. Emily watched me do each step, saying nothing. Only after I closed the laptop did she place her hand gently on my shoulder. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "You have to protect yourself." I nodded, but the emptiness inside me didn't disappear. 2 days later, the police called. A deep, serious male voice said, "We've reviewed part of the documents, but we need you to provide the original copies of everything, including the competency evaluation, the forged paperwork, and any evidence you have from Attorney Patrick Harris." I took a deep breath. "I'll bring them right away. And, Mrs. Doyle," he added, "please prepare yourself. This case may expand beyond what we initially expected." I knew what he meant. Ethan hadn't just made a mistake. He had gone far, beyond the boundaries of law, morality, and even the bond between mother and son. I thanked him and hung up. I sat down, hands on my knees. The Denver sunset outside stained the sky in shades of gold and orange, beautiful in a way that felt cruelly peaceful, as if the world was indifferent to the storm inside a mother's heart. I thought of Ethan, the child I once cradled, the child who once wrapped his arms around my neck and called me Mom, and I whispered to no one but myself, "Son, I've reached my limit. Saving you cannot be the reason I lose myself." For the first time in my life, that sentence rang clear as a vow. I must live. I must hold on to what remains. And this time, I choose to save myself. I had just set the stack of documents on the table when the phone rang again. A strange number appeared, but something sharp inside me warned before I answered. "Is this Mrs. Margaret Doyle?" A woman's voice, gentle, but with the tone of someone too familiar with tragic situations. "Yes, I'm speaking. I'm calling from the New Mexico Child Protective Services. We want to inform you that your grandchildren, Aiden and Mia Doyle, currently have no legal guardians." My heart seemed to stop. "Ethan and Lindsay have been detained," she continued. "Neither of them is permitted contact or care of the children until the investigation concludes. You are the only remaining direct family member." I gripped the phone so tightly my fingertips turned white. "So, where are they now?" "They've been placed in temporary care near Santa Fe, but by regulation, relatives may assume temporary guardianship if qualified. If you decline, the children will remain in care until the court determines next steps." I shut my eyes. The room felt smaller, closing in on me. I had left Santa Fe to protect myself. Now I had to go back to protect two children who had never done anything wrong. "How long do I have to decide?" I asked. "Today would be best, ma'am." I sat on the long couch in Emily's living room. The afternoon sun cast warm, golden light on the wall, but all I felt was a heavy gray fog settling in my chest. Emily walked in, and the moment she saw my face, she set her glass of water down abruptly. "Mom, what happened?" I told her everything. When I finished, Emily held her head in her hands, tears spilling uncontrollably. No way. Mom just escaped from them and now you have to go back?" "Not for Ethan," I said quietly. "For Aiden and Mia." Emily shook her head hard. "You've already suffered too much. You can't keep walking into things that hurt you." I looked at my daughter, who had left Santa Fe years ago to escape the heaviness in the family. I understood her fear, but even more clearly, I understood this. Aiden and Mia had no one else but me. "I can't abandon them," I said. "I can't let them end up in a care center." Emily gripped my hand tightly. "But what if you get hurt again? What if—" Noah appeared halfway down the stairs, having overheard us. He walked forward with a surprising steadiness in his eyes. "I'll go with Grandma," he said. I turned toward him. "Noah, this isn't for you to—" But he shook his head. "Grandma shouldn't go back to Santa Fe alone, and Aiden and Mia must be terrified. You can't handle everything by yourself." Emily turned to her son. "Noah, I'm old enough, Mom," he replied, "and I love Grandma. I want to help." I looked at the two of them, mother and son, caught between fear and devotion. Finally, I nodded. "All right, but only if your mother agrees." Emily stared at us both for a long moment, then exhaled, a breath full of worry and acceptance. "I'll pack his things." We drove to Santa Fe early the next morning. As the car wound along the mountain roads, I watched the red rock, cliffs, and familiar familiar landscapes pass by with a heavy heart. Santa Fe, the place I once thought would be my final peaceful home. Now it was a place I had to return to as a disappointed mother, a grandmother who refused to give up. When we arrived at the children's care facility, my heartbeat grew so forceful I had to place my hand over my chest. The small building had a playground behind it, toys dusted with a thin layer of snow, like the childhoods of my 2 grandchildren, frozen in place. A social worker brought them to the waiting room. Aiden and Mia sat side by side, their eyes red, faces pale. Aiden looked at me first. He didn't run into my arms. He didn't smile. He simply looked, then asked in a choked voice, "Was it because of you that our parents got arrested?" It felt as if someone had torn my heart in two. I knelt so I was eye level with him. "Aiden, I did what I did to protect myself and to protect you both." Aiden bit his lip. "But Dad said you don't love us anymore." I fought to keep my breath from breaking. "That's not true, sweetheart. I left because I was afraid something terrible would happen, and I came back because I couldn't let you suffer." Mia, the most sensitive of the 2, burst into tears and threw herself into my arms. Her embrace made me shake, unlocking layers of pain I had tried to keep buried. Aiden looked at his sister, then at me. In his eyes, I saw fear, doubt, but deeper still, a quiet hope that I hadn't abandoned them. I opened my arms. Aiden stepped forward slowly, then finally hugged me tightly. The 3 of us sat on the waiting room floor, huddled together under the harsh white ceiling lights. I could feel Aiden's thin shoulders trembling, Mia's quick, shallow breaths, 2 innocent children thrown into chaos they never caused. I patted Aiden's back, whispering, "I promise I will never leave you again, no matter what happens." He nodded against my shoulder. We were taken into a small meeting room to complete the paperwork. The social worker looked at me, her expression gentler now. "We need to confirm that you wish to assume temporary guardianship?" "I do," I replied, without hesitation. "You'll need to sign several forms and take full responsibility for the children during the investigation." "I understand." Noah stood beside me, one hand on his suitcase, the other on my shoulder, as if reminding me I wasn't alone. After nearly an hour, the woman handed me a sheet of paper. "Congratulations, Mrs. Doyle. You've been granted temporary custody of Aiden and Mia Doyle." I looked at the paper. Simple. A few signatures, a few stamps. But to me, it felt like a reminder that even in the middle of disaster, something was still worth fighting for. On the way to the car, Aiden clung to my hand while Mia held Noah's. The children walked so close that I sensed they were terrified that if they let go, they'd be pulled back into that cold room. When we got into the car, I turned to the back seat. They sat close together, their eyes still frightened, but no longer alone. Noah glanced over and smiled softly. "You're safe now. Grandma and I are here." Aiden lowered his head. "Thank you." I placed my hand on the back of the seat, looking at their small but resilient faces. This wasn't responsibility. It wasn't obligation. It was love. The only thing left unbroken after everything else had shattered. And in that moment, I understood. My life was no longer just a battle to protect myself. I had just taken on 2 lives who needed me, 2 hearts that had done nothing wrong, 2 children who deserve love, not to become victims. I turned toward the wheel, my voice soft but firm as steel. "Let's go home. Home. Not Santa Fe, not the old house swallowed by darkness, but the place where I could protect them." In that moment, for the first time in many long months, I no longer felt like I was fighting alone. I never imagined a day when I would drive to the Santa Fe County Jail as the mother of someone in custody. But when Patrick called to say Ethan had requested to see me, a part of me knew I couldn't avoid it forever. My 2 grandchildren were at Emily's house, and Noah was watching them so I wouldn't have to worry. On the way there, I watched the patchy, snow-covered fields stretch out, the bare trees standing still as if observing me. The silver-gray sky pressed heavily onto the roof of the car. I didn't know whether I was going there for answers or to say a final goodbye. The Santa Fe County Jail sat apart from residential neighborhoods, surrounded only by wind and thin ribbons of dust rolling across the ground. When I stepped into the visitation area, harsh white neon lights washed over the cold, gray brick walls. The guard led me to a small booth separated by a thick pane of glass. I sat down. The metal chair was cold through my my coat. A few minutes later, the opposite door opened. Ethan walked in. I saw my son, yet I didn't see my son. His face was gaunt. Patchy stubble along his jaw, eyes bloodshot as if he hadn't slept in days. The arrogant posture he used to carry himself with was now only a faded shadow. Ethan lifted the phone and gestured for me to do the same. As soon as we were connected, the first thing he said was, "Mom, you shouldn't have done this to me." I placed the phone to my ear, trying to keep my voice steady. "You did this to yourself." Ethan took a long breath, eyes locked on mine. "I want to tell you everything. You have to listen." I didn't answer. I just looked at him. Ethan rested his elbows on the metal table, his hands clasped together as if trying to hide the trembling. "You were right. I invested wrong. I trusted a group of college friends. They told me their company was about to land a big contract. I poured everything into it. It was all a scam." I wasn't surprised. I had suspected part of it, but hearing it from his own mouth still tightened something deep in my chest. I lost everything, and then I panicked. I was scared to tell Lindsay, terrified to face the loan sharks. He swallowed hard, lips trembling slightly. "They threatened to kill me, Mom. Threatened the kids, too." I looked into Ethan's eyes, the same eyes that once sparkled with innocence as he ran around our yard, now filled only with overwhelming despair. I borrowed too much. The interest went up to dozens of %. I couldn't pay anymore. I could only think about the house. His voice broke. "Your house was the only thing big enough to save me." I leaned back in the chair, keeping my breathing even. Ethan continued. "Lindsay knew, so she pushed me to do the paperwork. She said if we didn't move fast, they'd really come. You don't understand. I was so scared I couldn't sleep." I closed my eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "Ethan, you can blame anyone you want, but some actions belong to you alone." He shook his head, his voice rising with urgency. "You don't understand. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I was just desperate. I did everything for my kids." I set the phone down for a few seconds, not because the call dropped, but because I needed a moment to contain what was rising inside me. Those words, "I did everything for my kids," were not remorse. They were justification, a kind of manipulation I had spent years refusing to acknowledge. I lifted the phone again. "Ethan," I said slowly, "if you were doing it for your kids, you wouldn't have put them in danger of losing both their parents. You wouldn't have destroyed our home, sold the jewelry your father left me, or said those cruel things in front of them." Ethan turned his face away, unable to meet my eyes. "I know, but you have to get me out. Withdraw the charges. If you do that, I'll get bail. I promise I'll fix everything." I heard the words "you have to" clearly, the familiar tone, the demanding tone, the tone my son had used for years whenever he wanted something at any cost. "Ethan," I asked, "what do you want from me? Do you want me to hand everything over again? Do you want me to trust you again? Pretend you didn't try to take away my life?" He slammed his hand on the table. "Because I'm scared. Can't you see that? Because I thought you'd give me another chance." I tilted my head slightly, my voice soft but solid as stone. "You've had too many chances." Silence fell, broken only by Ethan's heavy breaths echoing through the receiver. After a long moment, he spoke again, his voice lower but laced with bitterness. "If you don't withdraw the charges, I swear that when I get out, you'll regret it." Each word stabbed into me like a blade. I stood up immediately. The guard stepped forward, signaling that time was up. Ethan jumped to his feet, slamming his hand against the glass. "You come back here! You can't leave me like this! You owe me!" I looked at him one last time through the glass, and in that instant, something inside me dropped. Not shattered, but released. My son was no longer the child I raised, no longer the man who once felt grateful, no longer the support I once believed I had. Ethan had become nothing more than a poisonous rope I needed to let go of in order to live. I turned away and walked out of the visitation room as his voice continued to echo behind me, bouncing off the walls and falling onto the cold tile floor, but I didn't look back. When I stepped into the parking lot, the Santa Fe wind wind hit hard, freezing against my face, but I felt myself breathe deep, long, real, as if I had just walked out of a room that had been sealed shut for years. I called Patrick as soon as I got into the car. "Mrs. Doyle," he answered immediately. "How did the meeting go?" I stared straight ahead, my voice firm. "I'm not withdrawing the charges." There was a pause, and then Patrick spoke, gently but with unmistakable respect. "You just made the best decision of your life." I leaned my head back against the seat and closed my eyes. Right or wrong, I didn't know. But I knew one thing. I couldn't save Ethan anymore, and I couldn't let him pull me under with him. "I'm no longer the mother willing to sacrifice everything," I said. "I'm just a woman who has to protect herself and her 2 grandchildren." Patrick exhaled, the sound of a weight lifting. "Right now, you are the only one who can protect what remains." I opened my eyes and looked at the Santa Fe sky turning the color of sunset, a familiar sky, a familiar city, but I was no longer the woman I once was. "I understand now," I said. "A mother can forgive, but she cannot erase wrongdoing. She cannot return to the place where she was hurt." And for the first time in many years, I felt myself standing on my own side. Time passed faster than I expected. Only a few weeks after the jail visit, the official trial date was set. During those weeks, I lived in a mix of nerves and quiet determination. Aiden and Mia started attending a temporary school in Denver, and I worked with Patrick nearly every day to prepare my statement. On the morning of the trial, light rain fell over Denver, thin droplets clinging to the windows like unfinished lines someone hadn't completed. As we drove to Santa Fe, Aiden sat silently in the back seat, hugging his backpack. Mia leaned her head on Noah's shoulder. The entire car felt the weight of a day that everyone understood would change our lives. The Santa Fe County Courthouse wasn't large, but as I stepped up those gray stone stairs, the weight felt as heavy as walking into the final chapter of my life. Patrick walked beside me, holding a thick case file. His eyes were sharp, like a man ready for a legal battle. Long overdue. I squeezed Aiden's hand. He looked up at me, his eyes both brave and painfully young. "You okay, Grandma?" he whispered. I smiled softly. "Yes, sweetheart, thank you." We entered the courtroom. Ethan was led in from the back door, hands cuffed, wearing an orange jumpsuit. I heard Mia exhale sharply. Aiden gripped my hand so hard I had to rotate my palm, just so he wouldn't hurt himself. Ethan scanned the room, his eyes passing over us. I saw something flicker there, something like regret, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. When his gaze finally rested on me, all I saw was an empty space I couldn't name. Lindsay sat in the defendant's row in front, not in cuffs. She looked noticeably thinner, her face ashen, eyes lowered like someone who no longer had the strength to resist. The trial began. The prosecutor read the list of charges: forged documents, property fraud, signature falsification, conspiracy to seize ownership, illegal sale of valuable assets, willful exploitation of an elderly person, and debt tied to a violent lending group. Each sentence struck me like a hammer. I knew Ethan had gone astray, but I never knew he'd gone that far. Then it was Lindsay's turn to take the stand. She stood there, voice trembling, fingers gripping the edge of the podium as if she would collapse without it. I admit I was involved," Lindsay said. "I knew Ethan had taken out violent loans. I knew he was panicking, and I didn't stop him. I pushed him to keep signing." "Why?" the prosecutor asked. Lindsay lowered her head. "I was scared. I was scared they'd hurt us. I was scared we'd lose the house, lose our kids. I thought if we acted fast, no one would notice." Her voice cracked. "But when I saw Mrs. Doyle get dragged into it, I realized we went too far." I looked at Lindsay, the woman who once stood in my kitchen helping me cook, who spent Christmas with me, who once called me Mom. Now she was here, confessing everything, but unable to undo what she had helped cause. When the judge called my name to speak, my steps faltered for a moment. I walked up, placing my hands on the podium. The room fell silent. "I didn't come here for revenge," I began, my voice strangely calm. "I came here to choose justice, not just for myself, but for the 2 innocent children sitting behind me." I saw Aiden lift his head slightly, eyes rimmed in red. "I once believed love could fix everything," I continued. But sometimes love blinds us, allowing others to hurt us again and again. I looked at Ethan. My son broke the law. He broke trust. But the worst part is that he broke the image of the mother I thought I was. I cannot ask for leniency for him. I cannot save him from the consequences of his own actions. But I do hope he learns something from today. My voice softened. I choose truth. I choose peace for my grandchildren, and I choose to stand. On my own side, I stepped down. The courtroom remained silent. The prosecutor presented the final evidence. Ethan's attorney tried to argue he had been coerced, pressured, mentally unstable, but the documents, emails, security footage, and Lindsay's testimony proved he acted not only from fear, but from greed and uncontrolled desperation. Finally, the judge stood, his voice clear, firm, without hesitation. Defendant Ethan Doyle is sentenced to 5 years in state prison for fraud, document forgery, and conspiracy to seize the property of an elderly person. I heard Mia let out a small sob. Defendant Lindsay Doyle is sentenced to 2 years of probation, required to attend a rehabilitation program and pay financial penalties. Lindsay lifted her hands to her face and cried quietly. Ethan stood alone in the defendant's area. He didn't shout, didn't resist. He only stared down at the tile floor, like someone who had just lost the last thing he had to hold on to. And in that moment, I knew all of us had lost something. No one was leaving that courtroom intact. When I stepped out of the courthouse, the early afternoon Santa Fe breeze blew gently, carrying the smell of damp earth after the rain. I stood at the top of the steps, looking at the gray-blue sky, feeling less heavy than in the days before, but not fully relieved either. Aiden walked toward me, holding Mia's hand. They stood in front of me, tears still clinging to the corners of their eyes. "Grandma," Aiden began cautiously, "do you hate our dad?" The question pierced the deepest part of my heart like a thin needle. I knelt down and placed my hands on their shoulders. "No, sweetheart," I said, my voice soft enough that it surprised even me. "I don't hate your dad, but I have to protect us, even from the people we once loved the most." Aiden bit his lip, eyes glistening. Mia leaned her head onto my shoulder and whispered, "Please don't leave us again." I wrapped both of them in my arms. "I promise." In the weeks after the trial, our lives began to shift slowly. Emily helped me complete the paperwork to become their long-term guardian. Noah did homework with Aiden every night. Mia started sleeping through the night again, no longer waking from nightmares. And I began learning how to live as a woman who has the right to choose peace. One afternoon, I sat in Emily's kitchen, looking at the stack of documents Patrick had sent. On top was a real estate report for the Santa Fe market. I knew I had to face the next step. I would sell the old house, not because I hated it, but because I couldn't keep living in a place that had been turned into a weapon against me. I called Patrick. "I want to list the house," I said. He wasn't surprised. "That's a good decision. Selling it is the final step in separating yourself from the past." And I knew he was right. 2 months later, the house on Cedar Crest Road officially belonged to a young family. They loved the backyard, the wide porch, and the old pine tree where Robert used to hang Christmas lights. I looked at the key one last time before placing it into an envelope. No tears, only gratitude, because I had survived long enough to choose the day I would let go. With the money from the sale, I bought a smaller home in Denver, a 3-bedroom house with a backyard for tomatoes and a living room full of sunlight. Not luxurious, not large, but when I stepped inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: warmth. Aiden ran from room to room asking, "Grandma, can we put the Christmas tree in this corner?" Mia opened the window, squealing because the neighbors had a dog. Noah helped me check every light switch, and I stood in the middle of the living room, placed my hand on the wall, and felt the strength of the wood under fresh paint. A smaller house, a newer life, a calmer heart. I didn't know what the future would hold, whether Ethan would change, whether the children would fully heal, but I knew one thing: we were starting over. Not from fear, but from freedom. The first few days in our new Denver home felt like stepping into a kitchen after a storm. Everything still messy, rough around the edges, yet offering a chance to rebuild life in our own way. I, Aiden, and Mia stood in the middle of the empty living room, surrounded by unopened cardboard boxes. "Grandma," Grandma, can this rug go in the middle of the room? Mia held up a small cream-colored rug. Of course, I smiled. We'll put the coffee table right on top of it. Aiden stood at the big window, watching the morning light pour in. Grandma, can we put a big armchair here so Mia can read? His question made my heart catch for a second. There was a calmness in his voice, something I hadn't heard in him through all the chaos months earlier. Of course, sweetheart, I said. We'll make this the coziest corner in the house. He nodded, his eyes softening. Little by little, the new home began to look like a family. Noah stayed with us for 3 months to help me settle in. He'd grown so fast, standing next to me. He looked more like a young man than the child who once rode a tiny bike in circles around me. He installed shelves, tightened cabinet handles, changed bulbs, and even hung curtains in each room. One evening, Noah swept the back patio while I stood on the porch with a warm cup of tea. "Do you feel more at peace now?" he asked. I looked at the golden sky, took a deep breath. I think this is the first time in years I truly feel safe. Noah smiled, his eyes so gentle it made me want to hug him. "You deserve this peace." One morning, while reorganizing the kitchen cabinets, I accidentally touched the old mixer, the one I brought from Santa Fe, untouched for so long. I hadn't baked in almost 10 years. Each time I saw it, I remembered Robert teasing me about adding too much sugar to the cookies. Aiden walked in as I stood staring at the mixer. "Grandma, what are you making?" he asked, tilting his head. I smiled. "I think it's time to make apple pie again." Mia heard that and dashed down the stairs. "Apple pie? You said that was Dad's favorite." Her words made my heart pause for a moment, but then I smiled. "Then today we make a pie for everyone." The 3 of us crowded around the kitchen. Aiden carefully peeled apples. Mia kneaded dough, flour sticking all over her nose. And I let my hands do something my heart had forgotten how to do, create sweetness after years of trembling and fear. When the pie finished baking, the smell of apple and cinnamon filled the house, bringing back memories of old autumns, memories that had never disappeared, just been buried. Aiden took the first bite, his eyes lighting up. "Grandma, it's been so long since the house felt like a real home." His words nearly brought tears to my eyes. Peace was growing, one day at a time. Then one afternoon I received a message from Lindsay. "I'm sorry. I know I have no right to ask, but I want to see the kids. If possible, please give me a chance." I stared at the message for a long time, not because I was still angry, but because I wanted to respond with clarity, not the remnants of old pain. I called her. Lindsay's voice was so weak I had to bring the phone closer. "Margaret, thank you for answering." "I didn't answer to scold you," I said. "I answered for the children." She broke down crying. "I know I was wrong. I let fear control me. I let Ethan drag me into everything, and I hurt you. I hurt the whole family." I stayed silent, letting her continue. "You don't have to forgive me. I just want to see Aiden and Mia under the court's visitation rules. I want them to see their mother trying to make things right." I took a slow breath. "All right. But any visit will be supervised by me or someone I trust. Yes, anything. I just want a chance." When we hung up, I rested my hand on the table. My heart felt heavy, but not hurting the way it once did. Maybe because I finally understood that forgiveness wasn't about erasing wrongdoing. It was about freeing myself from carrying anger forever. Emily's family visited every weekend. The house was always full of laughter. Noah telling school stories, Emily spinning the kids around in the living room, Ben fixing the faucet that kept rattling. I watched them, feeling warmth seep into every empty place inside me. I was no longer the woman dragging a suitcase out of Santa Fe, no longer trembling in the dark, afraid Ethan might be at the door, no longer the mother weeping for a grown son who no longer knew love. I was now a woman standing in the middle of a family, imperfect, incomplete, but genuine and kind. And that night, when I lay down in bed, I realized something astonishing. I slept straight through until morning. No dreams of the old house, no sound of doors opening, no fear of running. I simply slept, peacefully, fully. Another morning, under a bright Denver sky, I sat at the kitchen table with a brand new notebook. The first page was blank. No past, only future. I wrote the first line, a new life plan. I wasn't young enough to start from scratch, but I was strong enough to start from myself. I listed small things. Take a weekend art class. Start a neighborhood baking group. Save money to take Aiden and Mia to the Grand Canyon in summer. Plant a vegetable garden in the backyard. Call Emily every Sunday night. Send Ethan a letter. Not angry, but clear in boundaries. I wrote until the page was full of things I thought I had lost. Hope, plans, small dreams of old age. When I set the pen down, I looked outside. Aiden rode his bike around the yard. Mia drew pictures on the steps, and Noah helped fix the wooden frame in the corner of the garden. Sunlight fell on their hair, glowing like a promise that life, even when shattered, could still become beautiful again. I took a deep breath, feeling light the way I had felt after leaving the courthouse, and I understood. I wasn't just rebuilding a house. I was rebuilding myself. A woman once betrayed, dismissed, stripped of her autonomy, now standing firm on her own 2 feet. A mother once broken, now learning to love herself before anyone else. And a grandmother once in despair, now finding hope in the eyes of her grandchildren. Life never promised to be easy, but it remained beautiful, especially now that I had chosen to stand in my own light. The next Christmas came faster than I expected. A year had passed, yet sometimes I still jolted at the realization that I no longer lived in fear as before. On the first December morning, as I hung a wreath on my front door, the Denver wind was cold but no longer made me shiver. I looked at my small but warm house, white painted wood, black framed windows, golden light glowing from the living room, and I knew I had truly entered a different chapter. Aiden and Mia ran around the living room, each holding a box of decorations. Aiden was careful, placing each peppermint ornament exactly where he wanted it, while Mia was enthusiastic, but kept knocking over the lights. I listened to their laughter fill the house, blending with the smell of warm apple pie from the kitchen, and in that moment, my heart tightened with emotion. A year ago, we were all broken. A year later, this laughter was what brought us back to life. Noah appeared from the kitchen with 2 cups of hot chocolate. "Grandma, I made an extra one. Do you want more marshmallows?" I laughed. "I do. I need a lot of marshmallows." He placed the cup into my hand, then looked around the house. "You know, I've never seen a place feel this warm." I touched his hand gently. "Thank you, Noah. I couldn't have done this without you." He smiled, his eyes warm like firelight. About a week before Christmas, I received a letter from the Santa Fe County Jail. The sender was Ethan. His handwriting was no longer shaky or scattered like the letters from the beginning of the year. Only 3 short lines. "I'm trying to change. If you agree, I want to see you and the kids. I understand you don't owe me anything. I just want to see them. Ethan." I held the letter for a long time, not because I was easily swayed, but because I realized I was no longer afraid. I had learned to distinguish between forgiving and forgetting. Forgiving meant I no longer let the pain control my life. Forgetting was impossible. The next day at dinner, I said to Aiden and Mia, "Your dad wrote a letter. He wants to see you." Mia froze a little. Aiden put his fork down, looked at me for several seconds, then asked, "Is Dad okay, Grandma?" I nodded. "Better than before, but he has to take responsibility for what he did. I'm not withdrawing my complaint, and I'm not posting bail, but meeting him is allowed, if the 2 of you want to." Aiden looked at his sister. Mia held his hand. After a moment, Aiden nodded. "I want to see him. I want to know if Dad really changed." His answer made me exhale in relief, not because I wanted to push them into any confrontation, but because I wanted them to understand that the truth, even when painful, must be faced. We drove to Santa Fe on a sunny but icy cold morning. The road was long, but Aiden and Mia sat together quietly, no longer tense like before. When the detention center appeared in the distance, Mia squeezed my hand. "Grandma, what if I get scared?" I stroked her hair gently. "Then you just hold my hand. We'll walk in together." The visitation room was cold, lit by pale fluorescent lights. Footsteps and metal locks echoed steadily. When Ethan walked in, Aiden stood up abruptly and then sat back down as if unsure how to react. Ethan looked very different. His hair was trimmed neatly, his beard shaved. His eyes no longer carried the frantic confusion from the year before. Instead, there was a quiet stillness. Maybe it was because prison forces people to look inward, or maybe he finally realized what he had lost. "Hi, Mom." He spoke so softly, as if afraid I might turn and walk away. I didn't move. "Hello, Ethan." Then he looked at his children. Mia remained behind me, but Aiden stepped forward on his own. "Dad." His voice dry like midsummer sand. "Are you doing okay?" Ethan swallowed hard. "Yeah, better than before." The three of them sat down. I stood close, giving them space, but remaining near enough for Aiden and Mia to feel safe. Ethan lowered his head. "I'm sorry for everything. No words are enough. I hurt everyone, made you lose your home, and made your grandmother lose her trust." Aiden blinked. "Did you really change?" Ethan looked up. In his eyes, I saw something I had not seen in a long time. Sincerity. Slow, but sincerity nonetheless. "Yes, I'm trying." In the rehabilitation classes, they make me write down everything I did, every detail. I looked back, and I was scared of myself. No one said anything for several seconds. The ceiling fan was the only sound. "We don't hate you," Mia said, her voice trembling but clear, "but we're scared." Ethan covered his face with both hands and took a deep breath. "I understand, and I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. Knowing you're safe, that's enough for me." I looked at my son. The man who had pushed me to the edge of despair now sat in front of me like someone trying to gather the scattered pieces of his own life. I said gently, "Ethan, I forgive you, but forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and I'm not interfering with your sentence." He looked at me, his eyes turning red. But this time, there was no anger, no blame, only acceptance. "I know you're doing the right thing." And I, for the first time in many years, felt my heart finally settle. Not because Ethan had completely changed, not because everything was back to the way it was, but because I realized I had walked through the pain and stood on the other side, stronger, calmer, and free. The visit ended in silence, but it was no longer a heavy silence. When we stepped out of the detention center, Aiden held my hand. "Grandma, I feel better." I smiled. "So do I." On Christmas Eve, my house glowed with warm lights. Emily, Ben, and Noah drove from Denver carrying a whole box of cookies. Our new neighbors, an elderly Mexican couple across the street, brought over a pot of fragrant red pozole. The dinner table was full of dishes I had spent the whole week preparing: herb-roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, pumpkin pie, and the apple pie Aiden insisted on rolling the dough for himself. Mia folded each napkin into the shape of a Christmas tree, following an online video tutorial. When everyone sat at the table, laughter spread from the living room all the way to the back door. I looked around at the faces I loved, the people who stood by me at my weakest, the ones who helped me understand that life never abandons anyone who is still willing to open their heart. Noah lifted his glass. "This is the most special Christmas I've ever had," Aiden chimed in, "because of Grandma." The whole table burst into laughter, and I had to turn away to wipe the corner of my eye so no one would notice. After dinner, I stood on the porch. Snow drifted softly, settling on the roof, reflecting the golden lights. Aiden and Mia played in the yard, and Emily wrapped her arms around me from behind. "You've come such a long way," she said. "I'm proud of you." I held my daughter's hand. "I'm proud of myself, too." And for the first time in my life, I understood deeply what the word freedom truly means. Not the absence of responsibility, not the absence of ties, but choosing not to let the past define the future. That year took many things from me: my trust, my sense of safety, the image of the perfect mother I once clung to. But it returned something far more precious: myself, strong, protective of my dignity, loving in the right way, and knowing where my boundaries stand. I lifted my head toward the snowy night sky. 1 year earlier, I walked out of my old house with a heart full of wounds. 1 year later, I stood here, peaceful, whole, and I knew life, even after it's been shattered, can still become unexpectedly beautiful. On an early New Year morning, I stood at the kitchen doorway, watching sunlight stretch across the wooden table, and I found myself smiling. Life sometimes turns so gently, one small moment reminding you how far you've come. From a mother lost in fear, manipulated by her own child, I became a woman who could finally stand up and protect her own dignity. I no longer trembled at a knock on the door, no longer jolted awake afraid of the dark. I had saved myself, something I never imagined I could do a year earlier. Aiden and Mia sat at the table teasing each other over breakfast. They had changed in a way only hearts that were once hurt and then healed can change. Stronger, softer. They understood what justice meant, what compassion meant. And that love never means accepting harm. I saw the brightness in their eyes and knew the truth, no matter how painful, had freed them from the questions that once haunted them. Ethan still wrote letters every month. The first ones were short, awkward, fragmented. Then slowly they grew longer, more sincere. Not pleas, but lines of accountability, small yet earnest efforts to rebuild himself. I didn't know when Ethan would change completely, but I knew people could remake their lives if they truly wanted to. Forgiveness didn't mean returning to the past. It only meant I no longer allowed old wounds to dictate my future. One morning, I stood in my new kitchen. The mixer reminded me of Robert, of winters long gone, of kitchens that were no longer there. I put flour, eggs, and sugar into the bowl and turned on the mixer. The scent of dough blended with apple and cinnamon, warming my heart little by little. When the baking tray went into the oven, I heard Aiden shout in the living room, Mia laughing like a small bell, and I knew the smell filling the house wasn't just baked apples, it was the fragrance of a new life, peaceful and steady. I opened my planning notebook and wrote one more small line on the last page. Kindness is not meant to be exploited, and saying enough is sometimes the deepest act of self-love. It was the greatest lesson I had learned, one I hoped those listening to my story could find for themselves too. I returned to the table, set down the freshly baked tray, and a wave of gratitude washed over me. Grateful I didn't collapse. Grateful I had my children and grandchildren. Grateful for those who believed in me, lifted me up, and grateful for the strangers, the ones listening to this story, who took the time to walk with me through this difficult journey. I looked straight into the camera, or rather, into you, the person hearing my story. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you, being, for listening to the story of a grandmother who dared to stand up for herself. Because of you, this journey feels less lonely. I want to ask you something. The way people do when sitting together by a warm fire, where are you listening from? Do you think I did the right thing choosing justice over silence? Please leave a comment. I truly want to hear your thoughts. And if this journey touched your heart, if you saw a piece of yourself somewhere in the pages of my life, I hope you'll stay with me just a little longer. Please like, subscribe to the channel, and come back for the next stories. Not just mine, but those of ordinary people learning to rise, to heal, and to love themselves again. My voice trembled slightly, not from sadness, but from emotion. I placed my hand over my chest, feeling the steady beat, the heartbeat of someone who had walked through storms and found peace again. Thank you for spending your time with me. May you always be strong enough to protect yourself, just as I learned to protect me. And with the fresh golden pie in the oven and the sunlight pouring through my kitchen window, I closed my story, a chapter that began in brokenness but ended in hope, courage, and love for myself.